There are many different ways that the groundwater can get contaminated, and we classify the contaminants in different ways. We can say they're either dissolved in pure organic or inorganic compounds, maybe they're dissolved metals, maybe they're pathogenic microbes. In this image, so whatever the pollutant is going to perhaps send that contaminant below the water table into the groundwater. It doesn't always have to happen that way. It can just infiltrate. The concentration of the contaminant is going to be highest near the source. So especially if it's a point source, it'll be highest here, and then it will get more diffuse and carried away in the direction of groundwater flow. We call that whole area where the contamination is in the aquifer the plume. This is a pretty busy diagram here, but take a few minutes to study all the different ways. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, like 11 different ways that are places, situations where groundwater can get polluted. Sorry. The pollution can be happening for some amount of time, and maybe we don't realize it until their damage has already happened. So, like a leaky tank can be happening for years and years and years, and then one day they realize that there's a contaminant coming from that leaky underground tank. To clean up groundwater is really expensive. It's really time consuming. It's hard to do. Mostly it needs a lot of work, money, and time to clean up any kind of contaminated groundwater. So let's look at some specific examples. Just kind of go through these. On the upper right is a sewer line, and sewer lines, when they break, will let sewage into the groundwater. And sewage can be definitely a pathogen. Also, if it gets into surface waters like a pond or a lake or a river, can be and become an oxygen demanding waste and deplete the dissolved oxygen in a waterway. That definitely hurts the ecosystem. The image at the bottom is a feedlot, and see all these cows out here. All those cows are pooping all day long, and they store that poop here. And if there is a flood or a leak, and even just over time, that can get into the groundwater. Fertilizers and pesticides are put all over agricultural fields, and those in a high concentration are going to be contaminants. They are not good in high concentrations for the organisms, and they also, just like the last slide, they are oxygen demanding waste, and they will deplete the surface water if it gets into the surface water, deplete the surface water of dissolved oxygen. Toxic chemicals can come from many different places. So upper right, just someone with a bunch of old paint cans, just chemicals in storage here, and old barrels. Those can corrode over time. And any of these industrial waste, paints and thinners, degreasers and solvents can be very bad for the environment if it gets into the groundwater. Another toxic chemical would be petroleum. We're talking about any kind of hydrocarbon here. There's underground storage tanks, above ground storage tanks, old gas stations. These can have old tanks associated with them. They can leak over time. In lots of places, the tanks have been replaced in the last 10, 15, 20 years. So we don't have so many of those anymore. There are old houses in this area that have old underground storage tanks for fuel for heating homes, and those need to be taken care of if they're found before you sell a house. Landfills are nasty. The water that infiltrates a landfill and collects in a landfill and percolates through everybody's old trash. It's called leachate. And these days, a modern landfill is designed so that the leachate cannot escape. In the olden days, the trash was just dumped in a pile, water would percolate through that leachate, and the dissolved grossness of the world would get into the groundwater. That doesn't happen so much anymore. Mining waste, mining in and of itself is really no big deal, but when you expose all those earth materials to weathering and erosion, there can be contaminants that happen. So the mine overburden and spoils. This red in here is deposits from dissolving the minerals from the tailings piles. You'll get lots of acid mine drainage, sulfuric acid coming out of mines. So that has to be cleaned up. Cleaning it up. So one of the newer ways to clean up contaminated groundwater is bioremediation. That's using bacteria to clean up the groundwater. So that's been shown to be really effective. Another way is to pump steam down into a aquifer and force the plume in one direction or another, and maybe force it out of these in the vicinity of these pumping wells. Then they would pump out the water and try to clean that water or dispose of it in a way to keep it out of get it out of the system. In order to do that cleanup, you've got to really know the nature of the contaminant, because different contaminants are going to act differently. Some of them will stick to grains, others are really dissolve really well in water, some don't dissolve. So you have to characterize the pollutant, the contaminant, before you clean it up. Once you've characterized the contaminant, the next thing to do is to install monitoring wells. Monitoring wells, so they'll look like a top like this. We have these all over campus to study the groundwater on campus. Monitoring wells would be put around the aquifer, and they can sample from the monitoring well to see the concentration of the contaminant plume. So test for those. So this is the truck that is using this drill to drill down and install a monitoring well to monitor the groundwater. So the best way to deal with groundwater is to not contaminate it in the first place, and to contain whatever potential contaminant is out there. So this is what a modern landfill looks like. It's going to have a liner. This is before all the trash is in place. It'll have a rubber liner as well as a clay liner so that the leachate can't escape. And then on top of that, they would have monitoring wells to make sure the leachate wasn't in the regional groundwater. Underground storage tanks are now double lined. The walls are double thick, and they will again monitor the groundwater around them.